On today's show, the Cavs are back in action tonight, taking on the Atlanta Hawks. It is an NBA Cup game. Brad Rowland stops by as we talk Cavs and Hawks because he couldn't join the whip around earlier this week, so we'll do that. Plus, I've got a few mailbag questions, like what letter grade did the Cavs get? Has Kenny Atkinson done a good job this year? And did we put too high of expectations on Evan Mobley? We'll dive into all of that and so much more on today's edition of Locked On Cavs.
You are Locked On Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hi, everybody, and welcome into another edition of Locked On Cavs, a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, which is now the #1 sports podcast network in all of America. I'm your host, Danny Cunningham, and I also cover the team over at my Substack, The Inside Shot, which is right now 50% off all annual subscriptions. The link to that sale is in this episode show notes. You can find this podcast anywhere you get them, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Be sure to give us a 5-star rating. Leave us a nice review. Be a friend. Tell a friend about Locked On Cavs. And if you're watching on YouTube, do us a favor. Hit that thumbs up button for us. Click subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5. If your first $5 bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com today to get started. Brad Rowland and I could not link up this past weekend for the Whip Around episode, so he's going to join me in a second. We talk about Cavs, we talk about Hawks, the matchup that's going to take place tonight. I will say, however, we recorded this on Tuesday at about 6 o'clock in the evening, and there were some comments made in this upcoming conversation that alluded to the Atlanta Hawks beating the Washington Wizards on Tuesday night. I mentioned it in there, and prior to talking, Brad and I said, I don't know that this conversation isn't about the cup because the game does matter for the Cavs. The Hawks are eliminated because they lost to Washington, but Atlanta fell behind 18-2 in the first few minutes of that game, and I was just sitting there watching the game on my couch. This is my fault. The Hawks are losing this game to the Wizards because I said there's no way they lose to the Washington Wizards, and they got their doors just blown off in that game. So aside from that, everything else rings true from the conversation with Brad Rowland. So we're going to play that right now, and then we will get to some mailbag questions right here on Locked On Cavs. Back for the second time this year, Brad Rowland, who does a great job covering the Atlanta Hawks over at Locked On Hawks, and the Cavs take on Atlanta in the fourth and final NBA Cup group stage game for the Cavs. That doesn't necessarily matter. That's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to discuss the Atlanta Hawks because, Brad, last time you and I chatted was right after Trae Young exited the lineup with a knee injury, and Atlanta, I think, has gone through some ups and downs since then. What have you seen from the Hawks without Trae Young over the last, I guess at this point, it's been right around 4 weeks, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, it's 13 games now. The Hawks have played without Trae. It'll be 14 by the time I get to Cleveland. And it's been, I would say, better than expected, but also with some of the same tentacles that you might have expected. Like offensively, there have been some shortcomings, although they've actually played better than I thought they would, to be fair. And then defensively, they were always going to be better without Trae Young. That was the reality situation, and it's come to pass that way. So they benefited from a pretty easy schedule over this 3.5 weeks now that they've navigated. They've lost their two most difficult games, one of which was to Cleveland in a game that I saw you at not long ago. And they also lost to Detroit. But in the meantime, they've taken care of business against basically everybody else, which is not nothing. Like, schedule stuff matters, but you got to be here. You got to beat the teams that are in front of you. And the Hawks have done that. And kind of, I would say for me, more so than it's like about what's not going on with Trae Young, which definitely is a topic for good reason. But I would say it's kind of bolstered the Hawks and what they did this offseason to try to, like, for the first time in Trae Young's career, build a team that made sense when he was off the court as well. And they've kind of succeeded in that, at least through 3.5 weeks.
So over the course of that stretch, as you mentioned, the schedule has not necessarily been the most difficult, but I do think it's worth noting, like, they are 11th in offense since Halloween, which was the first game that Trae Young missed. So what have you seen? Because building a team that makes sense without Trae Young is something that you do have to do, whether Trae Young is in Atlanta for the long term or not. Like, you have to be able to survive when he's off the floor in a way that I do think it's fair to say the Hawks have not been able to in previous years. What has made this offense maybe not be elite, but what has made this offense tick without Trae?
Yeah, it's a few different things. I would say a lot of it is that they have been able to kind of follow through on the theory of the case, which is basically to play really fast when they don't have Trae Young because they know they can't really score in the half court. That's too simplistic, but you know what I mean. That's going to be it's a weakness of theirs without Trae Young. They've been able to play fast and they've attacked the rim very effectively. Jalen Johnson leveling up is an individual part of that on a number of different levels. But that's been the main thesis, as well as just ball movement. I mean, Trae Young is the best passing guard in the league, in my opinion, or certainly in the top 2 or 3. And they've actually averaged just as many assists without him as they did with him because they've been moving the ball like crazy. A lot of 0.5 basketball, just the ball is not sticking anywhere. And the other thing is that I'm not trying to pick on the Hawks for, I think they're 4th in 3-point percentage over the time that Trae Young went down, which I don't think is sustainable given the personnel they have. But that's been part of this too, is that they have kind of run hot. Vit Krejci has been on a heater, a guy that Cats fans probably don't know anything about, but he's been super hot recently. Jalen Johnson's making 3-point shots the way he never has down the line. So it's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I think the whole goal basically was to be like maybe a league average offense, like at the absolute best without Trae Young. And they've been, like you said, 11th in the league. And that is a number of different things, but certainly is encouraging.
So I want to talk about Jalen Johnson because I think when you look at the Hawks without Trae, he has obviously been the best player that they've had on the floor, and they've gotten good performances certainly from Nickeil Alexander-Walker. You know, as you mentioned, they've been shooting the lights out from beyond the arc. They're shooting nearly 39% on threes without Trae Young, which was not something that I necessarily would have expected. But Jalen Johnson, in the 16 games that he's played so far this year, again, we're recording this Tuesday evening before Atlanta plays their game on Tuesday. So while by the time you listen to this, these numbers might change a little bit, but like the premise of this won't. He's averaging 22 points, just under 10 rebounds, 7 assists on 56, 41.5, 80 shooting splits. How real do you think those numbers are?
I think the production is pretty real. Like he was one of, I think, 6 guys in the league last year. He got hurt midseason, so it was like 40-something games. But 6 guys in the league averaged 19, 10, and 5 last year, and he was one of them. So like he kind of, his game is set up in a way where he's going to get you points, rebounds, assists. Like he's going to do that. Whether he's going to average, 8 assists a game in a world with Trae Young back on the floor, I would say probably not. But 6 is not unreasonable. Like he's that kind of player where he's going to have the ball in his hands. He's a good passer. The rebounding is definitely real. He's an elite rebounder at the 4, like one of the best in the league at the position. And the scoring, I think he could average 22, 23 points a game, even when Trae is back. So that's all pretty much real, other than maybe the inflated assists. The one thing that I am a little bit more not worried about, but skeptical of is the 3-point shooting. Like it's 42% or whatever you said. I think it's 47% since Trae went down. That is not real. I'm pretty confident in that not being real. But
that is real for nobody.
Well, yeah, I mean, and also he's a guy that he's not a non-shooter, but that's been one of his questions about his potential like star upside is like, can he make enough shots on the perimeter? And I think this has been an encouraging run through that lens. But he's always got a profile to me as a guy who's like, you're hoping to get to like 36% on threes, like on a decent volume. That'd be a great outcome for him. And this is obviously well above that. But yeah, I mean, I think him taking the next step, making an all-star team. I picked him to make the all-star team for the season. Like I thought it was definitely going to be in the realm of possibility. And he needs team success to do that because he's on that kind of fringy level of all-star where like your team's got to win. But I think he can certainly average, like 20, 10, and 6 over a full season. That's very much in play for him.
I don't think the all-star conversation is one that should be foreign to him at this point. Like, I think that he's a great player. I think he has shown that. I think the only reasonable questions about him coming into this year, just like how is he going to react after having shoulder surgery? Because like, I do think that is not nothing for a basketball player having to sort of go through that rehabilitation process. I just don't think that that's something that should be overlooked, but it's clear that he has rebounded about as well as you could have imagined. So you mentioned it's been around 3.5 weeks, and the first game that Trae Young missed was back on Halloween. So it's been almost a full month, and the Hawks, I believe, put the timetable at he will be reevaluated in 4 weeks, which never means he'll be back in 4 weeks. It means he'll be back in like maybe 6 weeks, but we are getting closer to that date. So what I'm curious from your perspective is, how do you think when Trae is back, because the Hawks are playing a little bit of a different style, as you mentioned, how do you think they will be able to blend what they have done without Trae Young into bringing Trae Young back into the picture?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that there's some of the, and this is not surprising, you follow the discourse as well as I do across the league. When something like this happens, it becomes the Hawks are better without Trae Young, and that becomes the big headline, banner headline, and it's just the record. And I get it. I don't think it's true, but I understand it. But a lot of the talking points around that have been that I think people just haven't figured out what Trae Young's already been playing a little bit differently the last year and a half, 2 years. Like, I think people are going back to like the era where Trae and Luka and Harden were playing like the true heliocentric brand of basketball. And that hasn't happened for the Hawks in a couple of years now. With Quinn Snyder, he's not played that way. So that's part of this too. Trae's already done a little bit of this movement towards this more egalitarian nature. Obviously, he still has the ball in his hands a lot, but his usage has gone down the last 2 or 3 seasons in a row. And he's in a more normal star usage now versus where he was before. But also, I think, he's been traveling with the team. He's been seeing them play this way. I think everyone's saying the right things. I think he'll be bought into it. I think last year he led league in assists for the first time. He took fewer shots last year. He was kind of doing more of that. But it's more like, hey, now we've seen this for the first time in your career, Trae. We've now played this well for this long without you. We're still going to build around. We're still going to play the way you want to play to some degree, but it's not going to be the Trae show, and it already wasn't going to be. But now he's seen the proof of concept. So that's a long, winding answer to say, I think he will be more like last year's Trae, where he's averaging 12 assists a game versus averaging 30 points a game, the way he used to 3 or 4 years ago. But also more player movement, more ball movement, and I think defensively, there's a standard he has to live up to. And obviously, he's not a great defender; he never will be. But there is a level he can get to when he plays harder on that end of the floor, and he's flashy at times. But now it's like, hey, we don't need you to do everything else on offense that you used to do, which means now you have more energy to play defense. So he'll fit right in the way that they probably hope he will, but it's not going to be the way it was 2 or 3 years ago for sure.
Before we started recording, you asked me, you said, should we just like act as if the Hawks win this game tonight? Because it is an NBA Cup game. And I told you, I don't necessarily think that this conversation has much to do with the Cup, but they are playing the Washington Wizards on Tuesday night. So what we are going to do, not for NBA Cup purposes, but just for like the purposes of this next question, we are going to assume that Atlanta finds a way to beat the 1-15 at the time Washington Wizards and move to 12-7 on the year. Is that a fair thing for me to assume here, Brad?
They are 10-point favorites. They should win. I don't like to assume things in the NBA. I've seen too many things happen to where I don't want to do that. But I think, they have a good chance of winning tonight, Danny.
So saying that, they're 12-7 again, assuming a win over Washington, which I think is a very safe thing to do. Has the start to the season for the Hawks made you change in any way what you expect of this team for the full season and into the postseason?
A little bit, but it's complicated in that if you told me that I don't know anything about injuries and the Hawks start 12-7, I would have been like, all right, it's kind of what I expected them to do. Like, I picked them to win 49 games this season. That's like basically that pace. If you start 12-7, I would have been like, okay, that makes perfect sense to me. If you told me Trae was going to miss 3.5 weeks, I would have been, dancing in the streets as a Hawks fan at 12-7. So that's the nuance here. I think that there is, because they were able to withstand an absence from the player that they basically can't withstand an absence for the last several seasons. That gives you a little bit more confidence, I think, in the future about like how they might play when he comes back, but also just individual players. We already talked about Jalen Johnson, Onyeka Okongwu, all the guys. Mikal Alexander-Walker has been fantastic with the Hawks this year. So yeah, I'm a little bit more encouraged. Does that tell you anything about the way a playoff series might go? Maybe not, because Trae hasn't been playing this whole time. But as far as like racking up wins, this team has not been a 50-win level team in a long time. Even the year they made the conference finals, they weren't that level team. So them tracking to that, especially when you factor in the injuries to Trae, Porzingis, et cetera, it's at least a half step ahead of where I thought they'd be.
Well, that certainly is better than being a half step behind, I guess. And we will see the Atlanta Hawks again later on this year and potentially in the playoffs as well. And who knows, maybe this will be a big game with cup implications, but I doubt it because I just don't know that it necessarily matters all that much to either squad on Friday night. But Brad, thank you so much for the time, man. If you want the latest on the Atlanta Hawks, Locked On Hawks is the place to go. Big thanks to Brad for stopping by, and we will get to some mailbag questions coming up in a second. But first, today's show brought to you by DoorDash. The NBA season heating up, and DoorDash has found the perfect way to keep fans in their bag all season long. Whether you're watching for the highlights, your fantasy team, or just your favorite player, DoorDash makes every game night even better. DoorDash, the official on-demand delivery platform of the NBA, and they're celebrating with something called the bag drop. Every time an NBA player scores 50 points in a game, DoorDash drops 50% off your order with Dash Pass the very next day. And you're automatically entered to win your chance at the ultimate fan bag. We're talking player-inspired drip, exclusive gear, and stuff that you actually want. It's not just food either. You can get everything from snacks and drinks to headphones, ice, even socks, all delivered with DoorDash. DoorDash has you covered for late night highlights, last-minute watch parties, and double overtime fuel-ups. So the next time that someone goes off for 50, use the promo code NBA50, that is NBA50, the next day to get 50% off on DoorDash with Dash Pass, plus your shot at the bag drop. Dash Pass members only, 50% off up to $10 the day after a 50-point game with promo code. Terms do apply. No purchase necessary. Ends April 13th. Open to U.S. residents 21 or older. Visit DoorDashInYourBag.com for full details. DoorDash in your bag all season long. Thank you again for making this Friday edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen, and thank you to those of you everydayers that make Locked On Cavs your first listen every single day. Got some mailbag questions from a lot of you. Had several good questions thrown in, but wanted to get to like 3 or 4. Just figured that's what I would have time for after talking with Brad. And the first one comes from Ed. And Ed says, at the quarter mark of the season, what letter grade do you give the Cavs for their record and efforts? Better yet, why that grade? Well, I was not going to just go out there and list a letter grade and not give any rationale behind it. That would be bad podcasting. So I give the Cavs a B-. And as of right now, they are 12-17, or excuse me, they are 12-7 going into tonight's game against the Atlanta Hawks. And the Cavs, I think, have done fine. I don't think they've been great. I think there are things they need to be better. I think there are things that could certainly be worse. But given now, if the Cavs were 12-7 and Darius Garland had played like 15 games and they hadn't had as many guys miss time for injury, like if the health situation was different than what it is right now, the Cavs would have a worse grade. But I'm almost grading this on a curve because so many guys have been out because of injuries. I do think that is something that you have to factor in. And I talked about this at the end of yesterday's episode. The Cavs have played Toronto 3 times, and they've lost to the Raptors all 3 times. And Toronto is a good team. I don't think they're a great team. I think they're a good team. And in those games, Donovan Mitchell missed the first one. Jared Allen missed the first one. Darius Garland missed the first one. In the second one, the Cavs were playing their 5th game in 7 nights, and Darius Garland did not play in that game against Toronto. They were without several guys in that game as well. And then you go back to this past Monday's game, and the Cavs were without 7 members of their rotation between Darius Garland, DeAndre Hunter, Jared Allen, Dean Wade, Craig Porter Jr., Sam Merrill, Max Strus. Like, they were without so many guys that it's hard for me to look at what their record is right now and say that's a B-. But when you factor in that, okay, well, they've missed so much, I think B- is fair. I think it's actually probably a little bit closer to a flat B as opposed to a C+ because of all the injuries. With that said, I think the Cavs can and should have been better to start this season with the way that they've played. Like, I do think that offensively they've not been good enough. I think Evan Mobley hasn't been good enough. And I think those things certainly have to factor into any grade that you give the Cavs so far. But I look at their record and I just think it would be better if they were healthier. They're 4-1 in games Darius Garland has played. They're 4-0 in games Darius Garland has come out of healthy. And with that in my mind, it appears to me like there's a great team in there still. I really do believe that. But the injuries, I think, are the biggest reason why they're only 12-7 right now. If they were healthy, for them to get this grade, they'd have to be a few games better. And for them to get an A, I think they'd have to have a record somewhere around, I don't know, like 15 and what would that be? 15-4. I think that's kind of the team they should be right now. But given the injuries and stuff like that, I do think it's fair to say, okay, like, they've not been great. They've not been terrible. They've dealt with a lot of adversity. So because of that, I'm going to be a little lenient with a grade here and give them a B+. I do think they can be better. I think they will be better. I think if we are grading them like quarterly, and this is the first quarter grade, I firmly expect the second quarter grade for the Cavs to be much better than it has been so far in the first quarter. But thank you very much, Ed, for the question. Fungible 1944 asks, do you think Kenny Atkinson has coached well to start the year? How much of the lows of the season so far do you think are due to schedule and injuries versus actual concerns about this team. So I think Kenny kind of gets a grade that's very similar to the one I just gave the Cavs for their record to start this season. I think he's been fine. I think there are some things he can do better. I think there are some things that have been outside of his control. Like Kenny Atkinson cannot control what players are available to play on a regular basis. If it were up to Kenny, he would have 14 guys on standard contracts that are healthy and available to play every night. He would have 3 guys on two-way deals that are healthy and available to play every night. That has not been the reality of the situation. In Toronto, the Cavs had, of the 17 players on the roster that they have right now, they had 10 of them available, and all 10 played 11 plus minutes. Like, he is kind of doing what he can with what he's been given. So I do give him some leniency in that area. But that being said, this has by no means been, I think, a coach of the year quality job by Kenny Atkinson yet this year. It doesn't mean that he's not going to improve. It doesn't mean this team's not going to improve, because I do think, again, when he has a healthy allotment of players, he's going to look better as a coach. And I can't think of a coach typically that would look worse when the team is healthier. That doesn't happen. But the thing that I point to is one that I will talk about a little bit more in the next segment coming up here, is the way that Evan Mobley has been handled. Because Kenny Atkinson made the decision to change the rotation this year, to let Evan be on the floor alone without Donovan Mitchell, knowing that Darius Garland would not be there at the start of the season. And that is something that I think in theory makes a lot of sense. And it didn't go well. And Kenny decided, I believe it was the game against Houston over a week ago at this point, that we're going to go back to what worked before. We're going to go back to the rotation that last year was. And that was in a game that Darius Garland was not available because of his toe. And I think that decision probably came a little bit too late. And I think that the Cavs probably put a little bit more on Evan's plate than he was ready for. And I wonder how much of Evan's struggles so far this year have to do with the fact that he was asked to do so much so early. Could the Cavs have asked him to do, because I think that they have asked him to do like 150% of what he did last year. If at the start of the season they were asking him to do 110% of what he did last year, would he have been more successful? If they would have gradually given him more responsibility as opposed to throwing all of this on his shoulders all at once, I wonder how that would have looked different. I wonder if that would have changed things. Like, would we be looking at Evan Mobley in a different light if at the start of the season he wasn't being asked to do as much as he is right now, and would have been able to sort of get things going, find a groove, find a rhythm into the season, and then add more and more as you go? Because I think that is now the path the Cavs do have to take moving forward. I think they have to take some responsibility away from him. And it's almost like you're a kid trying to earn trust from your parents. Like, he has to earn that responsibility back with his play on the floor. And I think he's more than capable of doing it. And I do anticipate that he will do that. But I look at this and just say, I wonder if they would have handled that situation a little bit differently to start this season, if things would look different for Evan and would look different for the Cavs. So I think that, to me, is like the biggest issue that falls on Kenny Atkinson's plate so far this year. Rotations haven't been perfect. He has experimented a lot. I think a lot of the things that he has done will be good in the long run for the Cavs, for individual players on the Cavs, and for the team as a group. But I also look at this and just say, it's hard for me to be too hard on the guy when he's not had anywhere close to a complete roster this season. Like, it's not his fault. He didn't ask for that. Nobody wants that. I think he has done a good job, not a great job, a good job with the tools that he has been given so far. But the Evan Mobley one is the thing that I think is most worth looking at it as maybe the biggest gripe to have. Now, I've got a couple more questions about Evan Mobley, because he came into the season with expectations that were sky high. Were they too high? We'll talk about that next right here on Locked on Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is, of course, the NBA's official sports betting partner, which makes it the best place to get in on the action because the NBA season is continuing to thrive on. We've got a full night tonight of NBA Cup action. The Cavs are taking on the Atlanta Hawks. I'm recording this on Wednesday, so I have no betting line for that game. But as I said on yesterday's show, I'm going to look at Ohio State, Michigan. As I record this right now, Ohio State is favored by 10.5 points over Michigan. I think that is a spread they will cover. I think they're going to win this game by at least 2 touchdowns, maybe maybe even 2 touchdowns and a field goal, because I think Ohio State is very good. I don't think Michigan is great. And I am not an Ohio State fan saying this. This is not some Buckeye homer saying, yeah, gonna really give it to Michigan this year. No, I don't have a dog in the fight. Neither of these two teams are teams I would consider I'm a fan of. But I think Ohio State is just much, much, much more superior than Michigan this year. But hey, I guess anything can happen, as we learned between these two teams last season. So maybe that sounds good for you, or maybe the Cavs tonight on the road against Atlanta could be the thing that you want to dive into. And FanDuel has it all. Plus, you can even combine live bets into a same game parlay for your shot at a bigger payout when the game is going on either tomorrow or maybe even tonight. Right now, FanDuel giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Yeah, $300 in bonus bets when that first $5 bet wins. So just head to FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first watch on YouTube. If you are watching right now, do us a favor, hit the thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And Bobby Shenanigans, one of my favorites, asks, were expectations set too high for Evan Mobley this year? And my initial answer to this is no. Evan Mobley last year was second team All-NBA. He was the defensive player of the year in the NBA. He was an all-star. He was awesome. We have gotten to the point where Evan is showing up in the top 20 of NBA player lists. He has been somebody that, you know, when you reach that stature, when you have also too, like, it matters where you're drafted in this conversation. If Evan Mobley were the 27th overall pick and we were talking about him in year 5 like this, then okay, maybe like the ceiling's just not as high as we might thought. But he was the number 3 overall pick way back when. And he has shown every year, I think, that he's gotten better, right? He has taken, some years it's been steps, other years like last year, I think it's been leaps forward as a basketball player. So he has, to the question, underwhelmed this season. Evan Mobley has not been as good as anyone expected him to be. But I don't think we were wrong with setting our expectations. I think Evan Mobley is capable of doing all the things that we expected him to do this year. That's what I think makes this underwhelming. If this is just who Evan Mobley was always going to be, which I still don't believe that to be the case, but if Evan's only capable of being this, then yeah, expectations were set too high. I don't believe that to be the case, though. I think Evan Mobley can be much better than he is. I've seen, in fact, Evan Mobley be better than he has been so far this season. If you've watched the Cavs last year, you have seen Evan Mobley be better than what he's been this year. So I don't think it's been an expectations thing. Like, I think the world, because it wasn't just me, Bobby, it wasn't just you, it wasn't just the Cavs internally, it was everybody expected, okay, Evan Mobley, what we saw last year is real and he's going to be better. And I do believe that what we saw last year from him was real, but he's not been better. He has underwhelmed. And I think that when somebody underwhelms the way Evan has, it's easy to look at, well, expectations were just set too high. And I would disagree with that. I just think he hasn't met the expectations that I still believe were fairly set for who Evan showed to be as a basketball player last year. And then the last question of this show going to come from Whoopty Hell on Blue Sky. Can the Cavs develop Evan Mobley and shoot threes like this? I think so. But I do think the question is a fair one, because maybe, you know, I think when you say shoot threes like this, you are talking about the volume of 3-pointers that the Cavs are taking, because they are a team that takes a lot of 3-pointers. That's not a new thing. They took a lot of 3-pointers last year. They're taking a lot of 3-pointers this year. As I record this, they lead the league in 3-point attempts. That is subject to change because they don't play on Wednesday night. So like maybe, you know, someone could pass them, but they're taking almost 45 threes a game. I do think Evan can develop in that system. I think what matters is the guys taking the 3-pointers and how good they are, because right now the Cavs don't have the most shooting on the floor that they can possibly have. I mean, credit where it's due. I think Naquan Tomlin has been awesome in the minutes that he's played, but he's not going to be respected as a shooter from the outside. And I think that if the Cavs are going to play this style, they need guys that are going to give Evan Mobley space. And they have not been able to do that. And I think that really shows up because the Cavs are first in 3-point attempts, they're just 22nd in percentage. And I think that they, when they're fully healthy, have a roster that is much better than 22nd in percentage, but it hasn't shown because they've not been healthy. And I think that is one of the things that's not Evan Mobley's fault. I think it has impacted him as a basketball player, however. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked on Cavs. You can find this show anywhere you get your podcast. That means Apple, Spotify. That means anywhere else. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving yesterday. Cavs take on the Hawks tonight. It is an NBA Cup game. I believe they are still alive. Again, I'm recording this before the games on Wednesday night, so I don't actually know, but I believe that they are still alive. So the Cavs do have to win in order to potentially advance as a wild card team in the NBA Cup. The point differential will matters. I would expect the Cavs to try and really blow out the Atlanta Hawks in this game, but we will have to wait and see what happens. And of course, I will have you covered right here, wherever you're listening to this, Apple, Spotify, anywhere else, YouTube as well, tomorrow morning to talk about whatever happens between the Cavs and the Atlanta Hawks tonight. So as we get out of here on YouTube, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button for me, click subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And I will be back tomorrow talking more about the Cleveland Cavaliers.